Ferrari does anticipate updates, but the real goal is not to make mistakes. In fact, after the incidents in Melbourne and China, two races that many believe plunged the team into the abyss, while on the other hand, Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, Russell, only they have scored double the points of the Ferrari drivers, well, now they are thinking of a plan to recover the season. In this video, we'll examine the updates Ferrari will introduce in upcoming races and discuss the new simulator setup at Maranello. We will also talk about the Red's drink system and also about the Ferrari disqualification, because there are further details about it. If you like the videos on the channel, please don't forget to leave a supportive like, and if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Subscribe so you don't miss any Formula 1 themed video. With that said, let's get started right away. Looking back at 2024, it's inevitable to wonder why Ferrari missed the World Constructors' goal. The reasons are multiple. On one hand, the strength of the opponents. On the other, a chronic inability to maximize every weekend regardless of the value of the single-seater. One of the main faults is the strategic error related to the update package introduced in Barcelona, particularly that floor that unbalanced the car, causing it to lose direction and competitiveness for over 2 months. At least 5, maybe 6 Grand Prix were compromised before the correction arrived, a bit too late in Monza. A well-timed update, perhaps already in Zandvoort or Spa, could have changed the fate of the World Championship. McLaren exemplifies consistent, accurate and efficient progress, while Ferrari has suffered from each error made. And this is the crucial point. In 2025, you can't afford even a single misstep. It's premature to check standings, say Maranello. 22 races remain. But the numbers speak for themselves, and the already accumulated gap hurts. To recover, it's not enough to hope for miracles. You need to execute every single move perfectly. Verstappen's Red Bull proved it in 2024. Even in a car that wasn't always dominant, the maximization of results was impeccable. Ferrari has learned its lesson and is racing against time to bring updates already in Japan, with the aim of anticipating the complete package expected for Bahrain. There's talk of modifications to the bottom to make the aerodynamic platform more stable, but time is running out and the operation is delicate. In all of this, there is a fundamental obstacle: the budget cap. Resources cannot be wasted. Every wrong update is time and money lost. In a context where every euro counts, efficiency in development becomes crucial. The Maranello team is working to regain competitiveness through smart and precise choices, not revolutions. The stakes are high. Making another mistake would mean compromising an entire season, and there might not be time to fix it this time. So, some small updates will arrive in Japan before the complete package that we will see in Bahrain, with the aim of improving the floor by generating more aerodynamic load, but also improving the front suspension to reduce the chronic understeer that the SF25 suffers from. And this is a good positive sign from Ferrari that brings updates already to the third race of the season, because they are anticipating all the other teams. It's a bit the same move that McLaren made last year with the updates in Miami that surprised everyone by bringing them earlier than expected. From that moment on, they became stronger than all the other teams, becoming the reference car. So Ferrari wants to make the same move as McLaren last year. It will be interesting to see if they can replicate the same results from now on and hear updates that actually improve the car. But Ferrari is not just bringing new updates, it is also updating the simulator for Suzuka. In fact, Ferrari is looking for immediate redemption. After a disappointing start to the season, the team wants to send a strong signal, starting from the next race in Suzuka. In fact, it's race week, and this week will be the Grand Prix of Japan. To achieve this, it depends on a crucial ally in contemporary Formula 1, the simulator. Virtual preparation is now crucial, especially in such a tight technical context where every detail can make a difference. It's no coincidence that the Maranello team has updated the SF25 model for the simulator, with the aim of arriving in Japan with clearer ideas and a more understandable car. We know the SF25 is a deeply revised single-seater. New management of aerodynamic flows, reworked suspensions, and a different approach to dive angles to make the platform more stable. But every ambitious project needs time, and the data collected in the early stages were not enough to fully understand the machine. During the winter, Ferrari tried to widen the operating window of the car through the simulator. But it was the track from Fiorano to Bahrain that told a different story. In fact, the winter tests never sought pure performance, but only consistency between simulation and reality. At Sakir, the program was smooth, designed more for data collection than for exploring the limit of the single-seater. However, this probably prevented the capture of those marginal gains that are fundamental in the development phase. That is, that marginal gain that is needed to push the single-seater to the limit. Without really pushing the SF25, the technicians could not fully verify the behaviors in extreme conditions. So while on one hand the data was used to recalibrate the simulator, on the other hand the crucial references for understanding the long runs and the actual management of degradation were missing. In China, with only one free practice session and a finally selective track, the deficiencies emerged strongly. The lack of simulator experience led to wrong choices. The Leclerc was penalized by an inaccurate weight estimate, while Hamilton paid for the aggressiveness on the ground height with the wear of the skid. However, paradoxically, the problems have helped. The double disqualification forced Ferrari to a deep analysis, revealing limits but also clear directions for development. The behavior of the car in the long runs is now more understandable, and the correction with the simulator seen in Hamilton's sprint has improved. In short, with the information gathered in Shanghai, the work for Suzuka has been completed with greater precision. The setup has been studied with greater awareness, and the 3 free practice sessions in Japan represent a valuable opportunity to validate the solutions. So what is Ferrari's goal? To strengthen the synergy between mechanics and aerodynamics with particular attention to stability in the first sector and the most technical and challenging of Suzuka. And this is a solid foundation on which to build a concrete restart. The prancing horse needs to react, and this time it wants to do it with data in hand and an SF25 finally understood. So it's also crucial to improve the simulator after the first 2 races of the season, because we need to try to have the best correlation between the track data and the virtual data to then unleash the maximum potential on the tracks. It's true, the sprint race didn't help Ferrari with the setup preparation. The setup seemed good before the sprint race with Hamilton's sprint qualifying pole, the victory after the sprint race, but there was a lack of understanding of the single-seater before the China Grand Prix. But now the time has come. In Maranello, they now know what the right direction is to improve the SF25, and this is the most important thing we need to take home. In fact, what are the statements coming from inside Maranello? Vasseur calls for calm, but the criticisms cannot be ignored. It's not about gratuitous hostility. When you call Ferrari, certain embarrassments are not tolerable. The fans have high expectations, fueled by encouraging signs seen at the end of 2024 and an enthusiastic winter, also thanks to the arrival of Hamilton. Blaming the media for excessive noise is unjustified, as the same protagonists set the goals themselves. I would be disappointed if we don't win at least one of the 2 titles, Leclerc had stated, and Vasseur was no less. We start to win the World Championship. Yes, it's the next step. Now that the results are not coming, it's too convenient to back down. In Maranello, there's the belief that the SF25 has a solid base. The work group is determined to make up ground, with an update program that will start in Japan and continue throughout the month. These are targeted interventions, designed to correct technical limitations that emerged in the early races. Ferrari believes in their work and has no intention of raising the white flag, especially since the competition is ruthless. In addition to McLaren, there are the 2 Red Bulls with a still incisive Verstappen, and also pay attention to Tsunoda, who will debut this Grand Prix in Japan for his first race in Red Bull. And also pay attention to Mercedes, where Russell has taken on the role of mature leader, and Antonelli is proving to be surprisingly competitive. If we know it, Kimi is a great talent, and now he is showing it. But the most delicate aspect remains another, the ability to fine-tune the car. Vasseur himself reminded of this, emphasizing how the current technical regulation based on wing cars rewards those who manage to extract all the potential from setups and adjustments. Having a good single-seater is not enough, you need to know how to interpret it at its best, but here comes the real crux: even the best setup is not enough if the potential of the car is not up to the level of the top teams. Ferrari needs a real step forward in terms of performance. You can't cling to the track layout or favorable conditions every time. Whoever wins is strong everywhere. For example, Vasseur cited the 7 seconds gained in a few laps in the sprint in China as proof of superiority. But it must be said that Verstappen acted as a stopper, and Piastri could have set a very different pace. Ferrari must be aware of its own means, of course, but it cannot ignore that it still lacks something to be on par with McLaren, Red Bull and Mercedes. The double step that is needed is clear, one on the technical front with concrete updates. Incisive, the other on the operational front, to take advantage of every opportunity. There is time to recover, but from Suzuka onwards, no more mistakes are allowed. But let's also talk about Leclerc's drink system and why it compromised the race in China. Leclerc was disqualified in China for a specific reason. The SF25 number 16 weighed a kilogram less than the minimum regulatory limit of 1,762 pounds. The usual pickup in the return lap, that is, the accumulation of debris on the tires, was not enough to bring the weight back within the limits. According to Vassar, the cause would have been the loss of a liter of water from the hydration system tank, the so-called drink system. An apparently secondary problem, but in Formula 1, where every gram counts, can make a difference. And here comes the key point. The same problem had already occurred in Australia. Everyone remembers the strange radio conversation between Leclerc and his engineer Bazzi in Melbourne. The driver was complaining about water in the seat, and the response he received was so vague it seemed surreal. Leclerc, in his 8th season in Formula 1, knows how to distinguish between rain and internal leaks in the car. But nothing was said live, and they tried to gloss over it. Now it seems clear that a malfunction of the drink system had already occurred in Australia. In that case, however, the rain and the safety car reduced fuel consumption, avoiding post-race troubles. In China, however, the problem was compounded by tighter conditions, and the result was an avoidable disqualification. The real question is only one: why wasn't action taken to correct it after the first problem in Melbourne? If Vassura's explanation in Shanghai is correct, and there are doubts about this too, then Ferrari ignored a known defect, ending up suffering the consequences only 2 weeks later. After an unforgivable oversight at these levels. In Formula 1, every detail can determine the outcome of a weekend, and losing a placement due to a water leak is not acceptable for a team aiming for the title. Especially since after having already experienced it, one could and should have intervened. The drink system, designed for the comfort of the driver, has turned into a technical and communicative boomerang. A tiny detail has caused enormous damage, both in terms of points and credibility, and once again shows that to return to the top, Ferrari not only needs to build a good car, they need to become an impeccable team again. And so Ferrari, in addition to having underestimated Leclerc's first in Australia due to the loss of the drink system, which then proved to be crucial also in China, and which probably also led to Leclerc's disqualification along with other factors, another important piece was Hamilton's disqualification, which shows us a Ferrari that is aggressive, but also very much on the edge compared to all the opponents. In fact, in an interview given to the French press, Vasseur explained how the team decided to be more aggressive in China. An intention that can also be shared, especially if the goal is to fight for the title again, but the execution was anything but perfect. Being aggressive doesn't mean playing technical roulette hoping it goes well. What's needed is calculation, precision, and above all, awareness. But instead, Ferrari made a glaring mistake that led to a double disqualification, erasing Hamilton's pole position and sprint victory. Buster tried to defuse the situation, but the given explanation that aggression is part of the path to perfection sounds off-key, especially when accompanied by the phrase that more disqualifications could be coming. A message that leaves one puzzled. Is it really normal to take into account such serious mistakes in the pursuit of pushing the limit? The feeling is that Maranello is trying to manage the damage to their image more than solving the problems. And blaming the press for the media emphasis on the disaster doesn't help. The criticisms don't come from nowhere, they are the direct consequence of technical and executive errors that are hard to justify. Between the two cases, Hamilton's is likely the most remarkable. His SF25 was disqualified for an irregularity in the wear of the skid, the layer of wood resin under the bottom of the car. A minor infraction, only 0.0197 inches beyond the allowed, but rules are rules. And here lies the real question: how is it possible that Ferrari made a mistake in estimating such a fundamental and precisely calculable parameter? The bottom of a single-seater, especially with wing cars, is subject to continuous jolts, hits on the curbs, compressions, and rebounds. And for each track, all of this is simulated, anticipated, and adapted. The most logical explanation is that Ferrari made a mistake when entering the data into the simulator. In practice, the software calculated everything correctly, but it started from incorrect information. This led to an overly optimistic estimate on the wear of the skid, a human error in the end, but in modern, ultra-calibrated Formula 1, with increasingly narrow margins, it can make the difference between the podium and disqualification. Especially because in a race where the gap from McLaren was still clear, there was no real advantage in taking risks. And other teams avoid risks, while Ferrari must take risks to aim for the podium. This is the real limit of Ferrari at this moment, which is doing everything to try to
win even
pushing regulatory limits. Calling it aggression is fine for marketing, but in reality it was a technical and organizational oversight, not a blunder as Vasseur pointed out, but not a positive signal either. Because in a very tight championship, every mistake weighs heavily, and when it comes to Ferrari, it weighs even more. So Ferrari needs to try to go strong, but not go so to the limit, otherwise you risk other disqualifications. And another question that many of you have asked me is why Ferrari's pull road doesn't work like McLaren's. Let's look at it together. In fact, for the 2025 season, both teams have adopted the pull road layout, now considered the reference standard in the top category. But if the solution on the McLaren works perfectly, on Ferrari it still seems far from being optimized. The starting point is clear. McLaren has benefited from the arrival of several former Red Bull engineers, including Rob Marshall, a central figure in the current development of the MCL39, and the inherited technical philosophy has been taken to the extreme and intelligently adapted, particularly on the pull road front suspension. McLaren's great strength was to bring a refined system to the track, knowing in advance how to handle the difficulties of this layout. It's no coincidence that the MCL39 has become a benchmark in the management of the front axle. Ferrari also adopted an attractive scheme for the SF25 at the front, with the aim of improving aerodynamic efficiency, but the difference is not so much in the scheme itself, but in the geometry and arrangement of the arms. The key point is the upper triangle. McLaren has positioned one of the arms, the one highlighted in yellow in the graphic comparison, much lower than Ferrari. This allows the MCL39 to have a higher percentage of anti-dive or a greater resistance to the front sinking under braking. So what does all this mean on the track? When a car brakes, the weight shifts to the front axle. With a more pronounced anti-dive, as in the case of the McLaren, part of that load is not transmitted to the suspension. But it is blocked by the geometric system, and the advantage is that there is less suspension travel, and consequently greater stability of the aerodynamic bottom, which works under more constant and predictable conditions. Ferrari, on the other hand, with a more reduced anti-dive. It activates the internal elements of the suspension more. This can help bring energy to the tires, especially in qualifications, but it generates more vertical movement and penalizes aerodynamic stability. The result is that there is a more unpredictable and often understeering single-seater. The MCL39 has found an ideal balance between the front and rear, surpassing the Red Bull, from which it borrowed many concepts. The credit goes to an extremely refined suspension tire package, capable of activating the tires without penalizing aerodynamic efficiency. One of the smartest solutions is the use of the wheel hub as an active thermal element to help bring the front tires into the right temperature window. A technical detail that, combined with the excellent anti-dive, has allowed McLaren to avoid the activation problems suffered by Ferrari. It should be said that the SF25 has made progress compared to 2024 in the activation of the front axle, especially on the dry lap. However, the chronic understeer of the car remains a problem. The cause could partly be the suspension geometry itself, but also an overall balance that is too far back due to technical compromises that are still unresolved. Modifying the anti-dive is not simple. It's not enough to just lower a suspension arm. It takes time, development work, and accurate tests, all factors made even more critical by the presence of the budget cup, which does not forgive design errors during the season. In short, Ferrari is still looking for the right key to read and exploit the potential of the SF25. McLaren, having started earlier than Ferrari, has taken the right path by effectively adapting Red Bull's concepts to its own technical identity. The front pull rod can also work on Ferrari, but only if it is inserted into a consistent and well-developed system. And now, with a tight championship and fierce rivals, there is no more room for wrong compromises. In fact, the real problem with Ferrari is not so much the fact that it has adopted the front pull rod, but the real problem is the timing. The pull rod suspension should have been adopted a year ago, adapting it to single-seaters to the philosophy of the regulation. Having more knowledge about this new suspension, managing to adapt both the simulator and the driving concepts without suffering from chronic understeer, without shifting the balance too much to the rear end. In short, knowing the car better. McLaren had already been using the pull rod suspension for several years. They also developed the car to its best form last year, but it was actually a season of evolution, and arriving this year at the best of their form and of their knowledge. Tell me in the comments your opinion on all the topics I have covered in the video. Will Ferrari improve in Japan compared to the first two races? What are your expectations for this race week? I'm curious to read and respond to all your comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos on the channel. Daily, we review all Formula 1 news focusing on Ferrari. From the beginning, see you next video.